Rain lashed against Sarah's face. The wind howled like a hungry wolf. Lightning flashed, turning the night sky white. Thunder roared, shaking the ground beneath her feet. Sarah shivered, pulling her thin jacket tighter around her. She was lost and alone. The storm had come up so quickly, catching her in the open countryside with nowhere to hide. Through the driving rain, she saw a faint light in the distance. Hope surged through her. Maybe it was a house, a place to find shelter from the storm. She stumbled towards the light, her heart pounding with each step. As she got closer, she saw a large, rambling house, its windows dark and lifeless. But the front door stood slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling out into the night. Sarah hesitated for a moment, a shiver running down her spine. The house looked old and abandoned, but the storm raged around her and she had no other choice. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door and stepped inside. The door creaked shut behind her, plunging her into darkness. She fumbled for a light switch, her hand brushing against something cold and cobwebbed. Finally, she found a switch. A single dim bulb flickered to life, casting long, eerie shadows across the dusty furniture. The air was thick with the smell of decay and something else she couldn't quite place. A musty, unsettling odor. Sarah took a tentative step forward, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The house felt heavy, oppressive, as if it were holding its breath. The house was silent except for the sound of her own breathing and the steady drum of rain against the windows. She wandered from room to room, her footsteps echoing on the bare wooden floors. Each room was the same, dark, dusty, and filled with the remnants of a life long gone. She reached a door at the end of a long, narrow hallway. It was slightly ajar, like the front door. A cold draft seeped out, sending a shiver down her spine. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the tarnished brass doorknob. For a moment, she thought she heard something, a faint whisper, like a child's voice, coming from the other side of the door. She shook her head, attributing it to the wind, whistling through the old house. Taking a deep breath, Sarah pushed the door open. The room beyond was plunged in darkness, the only light coming from the hallway behind her. She stepped inside, her heart pounding in her chest.
Hello?
She called out, her voice echoing in the stillness. There was no answer, only the sound of her own breathing and the faint creak of the house settling around her. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she could make out the shape of the room. It was small and square, with a single window boarded up from the inside. A musty smell hung in the air, heavy and oppressive, and then she heard it again, the whisper. This time it was closer, right next to her ear. It sent a shiver down her spine.
Sarah froze, her breath catching in her throat.
The whisper seemed to be coming from the corner of the room. Slowly she turned her head, her eyes straining to see through the gloom.
In the corner, she could just make out a pile of something covered in dust sheets.
She took a step closer, her hand reaching out to pull back the sheet.
Beneath the sheet was a treasure trove of forgotten toys.
There were dolls with porcelain faces and painted smiles. Their once bright dresses now faded and torn. There were wooden toys, trains and cars, and a rocking horse with a chipped mane.
And there, in the middle of it all, was a rocking chair, its paint peeling, moving gently back and forth as if an unseen hand was pushing it. Sarah stared at the rocking chair, her heart pounding in her chest. She could have sworn it hadn't been moving a moment ago. The air in the room seemed to crackle with a strange energy, sending goosebumps erupting over her skin. She took a step back, wanting nothing more than to get away from this room, from this house. But as she turned to leave, she realized with a growing sense of dread that the door was gone. She ran her hand over the wall where the door had been, but there was nothing. No doorknob, no hinges, just smooth, cold plaster. She was trapped. Panic welled up inside her, threatening to choke her. She pounded on the wall, her fists aching, but it was like hitting solid brick. There was no escape. And then she heard it again, her name, whispered on the wind. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing around her in the confines of the small room. The toys around her began to move. The rocking horse's head turned towards her, its glass eyes seeming to follow her every move. The porcelain dolls blinked their painted eyes, their painted smiles taking on a sinister cast. The temperature in the room plummeted. A cold mist gathered around her ankles, swirling around the toys like living smoke. And then, through the mist, a figure began to form. It was a child, a young girl with long dark hair and eyes that shone with an unnatural light. She wore a simple white dress, now yellowed with age, and her bare feet didn't seem to touch the ground. Sarah stared at the ghostly figure, her heart pounding in her chest. Fear warred with a strange sense of pity. The girl's face, though ethereal and translucent, held a look of sadness so profound that it tugged at Sarah's heartstrings. The ghostly girl drifted closer, her eyes fixed on Sarah. Her voice, when she spoke, was a mere whisper, as soft as the rustle of autumn leaves.
"Help me," she whispered, her voice filled with a longing that echoed Sarah's own loneliness in that moment. "I can't leave. I'm trapped."
Sarah's fear subsided, replaced by a wave of empathy for the young ghost. She felt an overwhelming desire to help, to free the girl from whatever bound her to this house. "I'll help you," Sarah promised, her voice trembling slightly. "Just tell me what to do."
The ghostly girl smiled, a radiant, heart-wrenching expression that illuminated the small, forgotten room. She gestured towards an old leather-bound diary lying half-hidden beneath a pile of dusty toys.
Sarah picked up the diary. Its pages were brittle and yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. As she read, the tragic story of the young girl unfolded, a tale of loneliness, illness, and a life cut tragically short within the very walls of this house. The last entry in the diary held the key to freeing the young ghost. It spoke of a small silver locket, a treasured possession buried beneath the old oak tree in the garden. The girl believed that finding the locket would finally bring her peace. With newfound determination, Sarah braved the storm. She found the locket buried beneath the oak tree just as the diary described. Returning to the forgotten room, she placed the locket in the ghostly girl's outstretched hand. A brilliant light filled the room, momentarily blinding Sarah. When she could see again, the ghostly girl was gone, the room empty except for the forgotten toys. The house was silent now, the air light and peaceful. Sarah left the house, stepping out into the dawn. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean. As she took one last look at the old house, she saw the faint image of a young girl smiling at her from the window. And then, with a final whisper of wind, she was gone.